this work session of Anchorage Assembly to order. We're going to discuss the Eklutna Overlay District ordinance. Take attendance to get us started. Mr. Starr.
Bill Starr.
Patrick Flynn.
Dick Trainee.
Elby Gray Jackson.
Pete Peterson.
Kevin Steele.
Bill Evans.
Amy DeCosta.
Ernie Hall.
Jennifer Johnson.
Our guests.
Curtis McQueen.
Tim Potter.
George McCandless.
I'm going to bring some.
Go ahead, Mr. Starr.
I'm going to kind of orchestrate the work session, but I'm hoping that you find that it's a little bit different than our traditional exchange of information from a couple perspectives. The legislation that's on 14E, we've just now got the S version, has been around for about a year and a half now, about a year. Debbie started it, and I since adopted it and moved it through to this stage. Some time back, this body sent it to planning and zoning. It's come back, and the S version incorporates a good portion, if not all, of what they suggested, and then reinserts a couple points. I don't want to debate too much today the topics of it all, but it's fairly simple legislation when you read it. It's not overly complicated on what it really does. There's two factors primarily of what it is. From my perspective, it's proactive and it's protective. So when you have proactive legislation, in our case, the proactive nature is that Title 21 is not going to fit the bill. The land use regulations and land use codes for our unique characteristics in the development that's occurring and in this particular feature of the community, of all of our community, by the way, not just Chugiak Eagle River. This unique feature, meaning tribal recognized lands, if you will, the native village of Eklutna is what we're talking about. So from the proactive perspective, I want to be ahead of Title 21. We have an inserted Chapter 10, which gives us reductions in some areas and some aspects, but what I'm talking about are the allowable uses, the mechanisms for process, the ability for flexibility in development, and then basically just some other aspects. That's a lot of what's in the overlay concept itself. This is the second overlay district. We've got one that overlays our business core district in downtown Chugiak Eagle River. It's working out nicely. From a protective portion of this legislation, this is not to say that this land's going to get locked down and locked up. That's not the boundaries that are drawn here. Aren't an interest to be that. But when I talk about protective, I'm looking at sort of the traditional and the cultural and the respect for the native group. And so I would really plead for you folks that may not have that sense about it because you don't live there. I don't live in the village, of course, but it's such an attribute to our community that we all need to recognize it. It is the only tribal village, of course, in Anchorage, and so that has a unique characteristic in itself just to the community. So the protective and the proactive motivation here for this is that it's not to be less progressive or more progressive, but it's to certainly put down that. I'm going to give you a seat at the table. There is some friction, I use that word a lot, but there is some problems. And what happens in our area when you have sort of the table analogy, seats at the table, when all the partners come to the table, what ends up happening for the native group, the tribal council, the tribal board, or even the corporation of Eklutna, they come to the table, but there's 9 other people there. And what we're talking specifically is there's MEA at the table, there's the planning department with their professional group, there's MLNP, there's a whole host of other folks. And so what happens is they tend to become outnumbered for their rights and their need to have their voice heard. So I'll be blunt with you, some of this legislation sort of gives them the table and asks us to come to it for that. It will only take 1 or 2 more encroachments over the top of this village, for this traditional and historical perspective. It will only take 1 more power line, 1 more water line, 1 more tree clearing, 1 more railroad, or 1 more Glen Highway, then there won't be a village. And then we've done not a good service. The easement discussion, I'll cut right to it. That's going to be the big thing, is what are the easement rights? The easements are traditionally public use rights that say, hey, for the greater good, we got to go right through here. That's going to be the meat of the discussion for how I believe it's going to come down on Tuesday is do we want to go around this village and this attribute, which buffers the coastal nature of our community as well, right up to the bluff of that, or do we want to go around the easements from now on in the future? I think we have to have that discussion in a pragmatic way as they come about in a level playing field. So with that, I think just sort of enjoy the work session. Thank you. ahead, Curtis. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. First, thank you for letting us present today. Welcome to our new 2 assembly members. We're looking forward to getting to know Mr. Peterson and Mr. Evans. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting us present today. And thank you for taking this moment to demonstrate respect to the Denina by letting you get in our heads a little bit, our culture a little bit. I stand in front of you and I traditionally introduce myself as a tribal shareholder because I was a tribal member before ANGSCA, and although I'm a shareholder of a corporation, I am still a tribal member. And in our world, we have a balance to ourselves about what that means. I wanted to talk a little bit about what the genesis was with realizing I've got a tight time frame. As the corporation has grown and as this community has grown, you've got the city of Anchorage working its one way, you've got the Mat-Su Borough working the other way, and we've got the village kind of sandwiched in between. And since 1971, we celebrated our 40th anniversary as a corporation here a couple years ago. We have provided major thoroughfares, corridors for utility companies, highways, gas lines, fiber optic lines. The connectivity between the rest of the state as it comes through Anchorage crosses traditional Denina land and corporate land. In recent years, we have been asking ourselves in the boardroom and working with the tribal council, if we're going to plan to make sure that we can keep this community thriving with inventory, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, habitat, as a corporation, we don't want to forget where it came from as a tribal side as well, and that is, how do you have that balance between feeding the market and the growth of the community, and then setting aside and protecting and locking up key habitat. And we got together with the native village of Eklutna a few years ago, and we formed a memorandum of understanding. And the village made a list of all the things that were important to the mission of who they were. The corporation made a list of all the things that were important to the corporation. And what we found is we started to draw lines and connect were similarities. And the similarity in the theme was balance. How do we as a people have balance for a growing community? Many folks here know the school sites that we provide virtually for free. Chugiak High School is a good example. There are 4 school sites that the corporation only charges $10 a year. That's a way to give back to the community. One of the things that we, through our planning process, came to, and this is me speaking personally, is I would give the city of Anchorage and this community today really high marks in making an effort to celebrate the culture of Alaska Natives, the naming of the Denina Center, the various museums, the most recent exhibit we've had. By the way, can we hand out some of those books from that exhibit that we've had at the museum? Such a long history here in Anchorage of trying to make sure, whether it's the Heritage Center, as I said, museums, to try to stop and take a look at the artifacts and the culture of the people that were here. What are we talking about today? We're talking about the most prestigious, most pristine artifact we have, which is the land of the village. We tend to look at that as our own museum, where we came from. You saw one of the last pictures we showed of a future generation of our children. Many of our folks have a connection to the village. Many of our folks would like to move back and have a connection to the village. And the corporation has a responsibility not only from economic development, but ANGSCA clearly charged us with, we were part of the architects of ANGSCA, social issues, social awareness, cultural issues, cultural awareness. Eklutna has had a long history of taking its checkbook and making sure that we spend time, money, and resources on protecting that side of ourselves. We are, on the corporate side, the economic vehicle to lift our people up through dividends, through jobs, through scholarships. But who are our people? Our people are our tribal members, our tribal shareholders. We have been working very hard in recent years as the community has grown to try to pick a spot and boundaries within the native village of Eklutna to say, this is what we want to protect. This is where we don't want the encroachment to go. Imagine the MEA project. That was a challenging project. It took us 2.5 years to rationalize the value to the community and where we put it. That demonstrates an example of when we step up and we do things for the community, including DOT roads. But we, on the other side of the highway, have looked at that gem of the village of Eklutna, and we've made it an effort to try to protect that. We are asking this community and the Assembly to acknowledge what the village is at Eklutna, and please help us protect it. When it comes to utilities and thoroughfares, we have gas lines, water lines, power lines. We have worked and negotiated with every utility. We've never been an obstacle. We've always worked well with them. In recent years, Municipal Light and Power needed a whole bunch of new power lines. We worked with them. So we've got a track record of being a people who roll up our sleeves and sit down and look at the big picture. We're just asking today that folks take a look at our picture. And we were going to have Mr. Lee Steppen on. I apologize, Lee is not here to speak a little bit on behalf of the village. We do have some tribal shareholders here. Some members serve on our board, some members serve on our council, and some members wear 2 hats. And I'd like to wrap up because Tim Potter's going to do a great presentation and offer, in Lee's absence, would anybody like to make a couple comments on behalf of NVE? Kim?
I would, yes, thank you. I wanted you all to know that the council met about a month ago and we discussed the overlay district, and everybody understands for the most part what it is and they are in favor of it. And we're going to be continuing to put out updates to our tribal members through our newsletter and also at the next meeting, and keeping them informed about this process all along the way. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it is important as we get our definitions. You know, I've learned a lot in my studies just since I moved here 20 years ago on it. And I think we all have to recognize the relationship between the tribal council, the federally recognized tribe. It is separate government, separate illustrations. Anybody that's lived out of state has seen the reservation system, perhaps the Navajo and the Apaches. You know, I've learned it's okay to say the word Indian now, and some of that, as long as you get that cultural respect for that traditional stuff, it's an okay word to talk there. The relationship between the tribal council, the board, and then the corporation of Eklutna, there's an interplay that goes on with that. You see Curtis as the CEO of Eklutna, he's here, they represent the largest landholder in Anchorage. That's also their corporate responsibility, as Curtis said, to protect that traditional cultural background that perhaps the tribal council doesn't have the mechanism to talk. So they've come to us and they've said, hey, can you help us protect some of that tribal and cultural stuff? That's why it took so long to show you the 10 or 15 minutes of what you're trying to protect. Once that's gone, I think it's gone. And I've often said in a derogatory way, we don't want to be like Anchorage out there yet. And I think we all have a chance to sort of take our mark. And it without getting too sappy and sentimental, this will be pretty striking legislation for us to look back on 5 years from now and say, we sort of did the right thing there. The technical and the meat of the potatoes is going to be with Dowell's presentation. And I sat on planning and zoning, and it's allowable uses and it's conditional uses, and it's, you know, that's where the differences are going to be. What can be built out there, Quonset huts, the number of people, the landscaping requirements. It really gets down to some of those technical discussions, the discussions on how and when easements are pushed through. Is, as I've mentioned earlier, an area that we're asking for some difference on as well. But you know, Dowell has a great understanding of development and good development, you know, throughout. And it isn't a statement, as I said earlier, to try to stop the presses or lock down and lock up the lands. Come out to my community in Amy's and see Powder Ridge and see the new roads and see all the new progressive stuff. But then also make a point to get off and go to the village. And you'll see a very nice balance and blend. And if we can't preserve that around the cultural respect that we have for the folks that came before us, we should get out of business. So can you show us the nuts and bolts, Mr. Potter?
We're going to do a couple of things. This is Michelle Ritter, who's a senior planner at Dowell and has been very involved in this. We have a PowerPoint, which is going to come up. We also have a handout of that PowerPoint, as well as a handout that is a precursor to the work that is shown in the PowerPoint. And that effectively shows you, in part, the discussion that was held with the tribal council itself, the shareholders out in the village. it was determined that they were feeling like the pressures of the world and the development of Anchorage and the Valley were continuing to encroach. They had a couple of episodes in dealing with the conditional use with the Alaska Railroad when the city required or attempted to require as a requirement and conditional approval of that conditional use that a public trail be put basically through what is now the village and was the village. That was overturned by higher up staff, which was a benefit. But it was the acknowledgement at that point that because there's trails, plans, and other things that are there that are essentially accommodated or adopted by and referenced as elements of comprehensive plan, that everybody needed to pay attention that when future things happen, the effort was going to be to put those projections and transections through the village. Now, if you have a village and the lifestyle is trying to be very culturally correct and maintain what's happened in the past, sometimes our rules, our Title 21 land use regulations and development codes don't really take into account the traditional nature of lifestyle, whether it's hunting and gathering, whether it's having multi-generational housing on the same lot so that the auntie can live close to the kids and whatever, which, you know, we'll get into that more from the rest of our standpoint, but that's really where this came from. So one of the handouts shows a lot of the questions that were asked and items that were identified by the tribal council as important to try and preserve. And if you can imagine if you had a piece of property that you were trying to set aside and protect and use for subsistence gathering and lifestyle, and let's say a public trail like the coastal trail came through, unless you built a fence on either side of that and basically bisected your land and made it impossible to have it flow, you would have endless interruption and encroachment, effectively welcoming to trespass, which has happened in the rest of the corridors, the utility corridors that Curtis talked about. If you go through Powder Ridge or any of the rest of the property that has been developed with the water line corridor, the big transmission power line corridors and that, all the public believes those are public ways for trails and walking and taking their dogs, which has a significant impact on the land. They jeep their trucks out there, they dump washers and freezers and dryers, everything, and stuck old vehicles out there. And that's not what should be happening in the village of Eklutna. So if we could go forward, just after I say thank you very much, everybody in the room needs to recognize Erica McConnell. Erica has been a huge help working with us, and this has been from the tribal council and the board at Eklutna standpoint, a 3 or 4 year effort. And Erica's been dealing with it for a lot of the last year, trying to help make sure that we can make an overlay district that works inside the structure of Title 21 and the city's land use requirements, and yet still does what we're trying to do for uses in the village and give everybody equal protections. So with that, thank you, Erica. This is a brief summary of basically the handout that shows all the different questions that were asked of the tribal council. So we looked at, you know, what type of context theme should the overlay district preserve and maintain. So we really looked at, you know, where the boundaries of this overlay district would be, pedestrian paths, lighting standards. Does the village really need to have city standard roads that are of a certain width that are bigger than what they need out there? Do they need to have street lighting? Do they need to have attached or detached walkways? They have a different style of living out there, and maybe our prescribed design criteria manual really isn't the design way. So for an 800-acre area, can we not have to live by those rules in this area and just do what's necessary and appropriate, still respecting safety and fire code? So with that, we went through and identified these items. We looked at the types of uses that were going to be preserved, and the other types of activities that were very important to acknowledge: hunting, fishing, berry picking, plant gathering, and firewood. Having either a wood lot, having communal wood storage. When Eklutna Inc. has a development, they typically, when they clear the land, they set aside the logs that come off of the property and the development and make that available to the tribal council and residents of the village to be able to cut and use for firewood. So it really is a kind of total balanced picture. This is the proposed boundary. On the lower left is really the Eklutna River alignment. It meanders in there a bit, but we took the northern side and eastern side of the Eklutna River and identified that as the edge, the Glen Highway as the eastern edge, the property boundary adjacent to the Wells Fargo, what was the old NBA picnic ground site, and then the coast. So you can see the light and the dark. The railroad is the linear two white lines that go through the parcel. So you can see the village and where most of the people are living. Subsistence happens all over. The big scar up on the top right is one of the objects, the plural objects running by the river. That is the namesake for Eklutna. That was under control of the Alaska Railroad via the federal government as a federal railroad originally. And about half of that knob, or granite knob, one of the plural objects, has been quarried out and used for railroad ballast and rock, and that in a mutual agreement between Eklutna and the railroad, Pat Gamble, then president of the railroad, allowed an agreement to occur that would allow them to take the remainder of the processed material out of the quarry under a conditional use permit. And when that was done, then the property would be then reverted back to Eklutna, which is a pretty significant process in itself, both statewide and federally. But that has occurred now, so that area is part of the area. This is about 802 acres. I put together this slide to give you a perspective. On the right is Kincaid Park. Everybody knows that, has an idea what the size is. You can see the Eklutna Overlay District in reference to the size of that. If you look to the left, that is Bicentennial Park, which we all love and revere and try and protect. And you can see the boundary of the Overlay District. So you can see it's not a very big area relative to other areas that the rest of us have set aside for protection for our uses. This map is kind of an area-wide that gives you an idea of, up at the top, you can see the overlay district that's being proposed. The kind of chartreusey color is Chugach State Park. The light color up on the top at the north end is the Hay Flats refuge area. To the east of the overlay area is state DOT-owned property that is mostly wetlands. That was accommodated, or I guess purchased, as a result of trying to do the upgrades to the Glen Highway. You can see there is Beach Lake Park over on the left. You can see the Birchwood Airport. That's really nice to point out Birchwood Airport. Perfected right there. So this is the area, and this was to show you where the transportation and utility corridors are. You can see the Eklutna water pipeline coming down from Eklutna Lake. It crosses the highway right by the south end of the overlay district and then travels south through a lot of Eklutna land to get to us here. So that's already in place. The yellow white line is the big consortium, MEA, Chugach Electric, ML&P consortium transmission power line that carries power to the city. That is already in a corridor. It's established, so that's in place. We've talked to AWWU at the request of the city to see if there were issues. AWWU does not service this area on the village side, west of the Glen Highway, as part of their RCA boundary of area. Likewise, we talked to a couple of the utility companies that provide power. We had discussions with the city attorney, and one of his concerns was that we were trying to lock up any additional development so that anybody doing development, even within this on private property, would have to then go to Eklutna Inc. That's not the case. We put additional language in so that if you do a subdivision, you're not only required to do whatever easements are required to get the power or the road to your property, but you have to provide that to the adjacent property, which is common practice in code and is reflective of the tariffs of all the operating utilities that are governed by the RCA. So we believe that we're trying to show that all of the major utility and road improvements that are in place for the general community are east of the village location. And if you look at really how the boundary of the flats, the mud flats, and coastal area are, this is like a little projection of Pimple out into the flats. And everything else is hugging the base of the mountain and coming through. So we do not believe that it's an overwhelming challenge in the future for Anchorage to put trails, put other improvements, expand the highway corridor outside of the village boundary. And that's what this is attempting to show. So here we go in a little bit closer so you can see a little bit more detail of where the yellow line comes through, how the flats, how this area is, where the village actually sits there, and that the water line and the power line are really outside of the village area, and that would not be an issue. The railroad corridor or right-of-way is exempted out of it's within the village boundary, but by legal descriptions, it's exempted out. So, if they wanted to run fiber optics, like typically, that's still possible. Yeah.
Jennifer?
And I'm not sure if you can answer this, but do we know what proposed gas pipeline, what they're looking at as far as their routes?
Advise on what you're talking about. The MEA power plant is kind of hard to see on it. There's a massive power plant. It has to be served by natural gas. It's not yet. That's the power plant.
It's two questions. It's
Right.
that's one of them. The other is actually the large pipeline.
So, we have worked with NSTAR and MEA, and NSTAR has actually been NSTAR has a major infrastructure right in the heart of the village, right next to the tribal buildings.
Right.
They have come in recent years and they've upgraded those in anticipation of more gas. So I know that NSTAR has come in, looked at its existing thoroughfare and added capacity. They have also, MEA asked us to support, so did NSTAR, and our board did, so did the village, that they bored up under the highway last summer. And now there's natural gas that is brought in up under the highway from the village over to the MEA plant. Regarding the big pipe, regarding the industry, we know that that's pretty quietly guarded, but we know that by seeing NSTAR update their infrastructure, they must be anticipating something tying to their existing systems. We have not been approached by any of the major players about where a big line would connect to the city of Anchorage. But we anticipate that will come one day, and NSTAR likes going along the Glen Highway.
Okay.
Tim, you want to continue, please?
Sure. Go ahead. Go on through. This is to show you that there really is zoning that underlies this area. So these are the existing designations for current zoning under Chapter 10 and our land use regulations in Title 21. And it shows you the boundary of the area. And the overlay is kind of an exceptional zoning district that further limits and or identifies the types of uses that are going to be there, gives dimensional standards and what the improvements are to be within that. So it's a specialized, as the downtown core of Eagle River did with their overlay, it's a specialized condition. It does allow, and what's very important to note is that several key things that come out of it is that if you have a lot, like an R7 lot, for rural development, right now the code would allow you to have one principal structure on that piece of property. Say it's 2 or 5 acres. And under the overlay district, a family that wanted to have a multi-generational occupation of that, they could have one or two or three, either attached or separate buildings, so that different generations could live on the property, maybe not necessarily in the same structure, take care of each other from an extended family standpoint, as long as they could meet the fire code requirements and the state health code. So they would have to meet their on-site septic requirements on the property. If they couldn't, then they wouldn't be able to do that. So the baseline safety issues have been incorporated and carried through. So it's not like they can just go do whatever they want. They still have health and safety standards, but they could have more than one principal structure on that lot within this 800 acres. So it's a very limited area that we're talking about. I guess the other thing to show here is that, and it's hard to see in this light, but there's a very significant conservation easement that overlays. Maybe Michelle can kind of even point to the boundary, and you can see it better in your handouts. That about half of that purple area is already in a conservation easement that was set aside by Eklutna Inc. to maintain kind of the coastal habitat area. And it actually extends basically down to the Birchwood Airport area, all along the coast. So that's a very important factor, because that habitat is very critical to subsistence life within the culture of the village. It's already been set aside for that, which in large part will be a benefit to the entire community as well. This is one that Erica, we had in our proposed ordinance, we had a whole specialized list of uses that you could do within this specific overlay district. And Erica, brilliant as she is, said, you know, why don't we just incorporate those uses in the overall matrix for Chapter 10? And then it's very clear to everybody. So it was the right way to go. Appreciate a recommendation. So on the very right-hand end, you see the Eagle River, or the Eklutna Village overlay, the EVO. So it's Chudiak Eagle River Dash Eklutna Village overlay. And through that, you see the uses that are permitted by right, and or they are conditional uses. If there's a blank square there, then those things are not permitted. Key to this, that there are kind of use areas where you may be able to have what would typically be called an accessory use. You could have that as a principal use, possibly a lodge cover that you have cut firewood. That would be a communal wood storage area that then that wood could go out from people. If you tried to do that under the current zoning, you wouldn't be able to do that, because to have an accessory use, you actually have to have a principal use on that property. So those were some of the things that were worked into this. I'd say probably the other key item in this is that there was a concern that there would be in the future, as Curtis moves on and the board moves on and the tribal council changes and Tim's dead, that there would be a bait and switch that would come back, and there'd be an outlet mall proposed out here that would not be subject to any of Title 21 design standards. So we worked with staff to accommodate and incorporate something that would be a catch-all, that you can't do that. There'd be a threshold, and if you went above that, so that it was no longer a small-scale development, it would kick a trigger, and you have to go through the big box review process, and then the community does have something to say about it. I think these are in your handout. You can certainly take a look at those. So we've got a limited number of uses. The village is looking and trying to get funding for a clinic. That's accommodated in here. You'll see that if there is a helipad or heliport, it's permitted if it's directly associated with the clinic. If it's a standalone commercial heliport, it's a conditional use, much like the current code is everywhere else in town. And those are really the highlights of this. We do have dimensional standards on the last page of this matrix, and that gives you the basic lot size requirements, what the yard setbacks are. There was a concern because we had eliminated landscaping standards, and when we we did that, our intent was to get out of the thing that would say, okay, if you build something here, you have to have a row of a spruce tree, a birch tree, and 3 shrubs per tree on the perimeter outline of the property, which is so non-village, that just seemed a natural thing to do. The concern came back that we could just strip the site, not put anything down if there would be an erosion problem. So there was an amendment that we offered at Planning and Zoning. They actually forgot to insert that, and we've asked Julia and Bill and Dick to make sure that that got in, and that is in your S version. That disrupted areas where there's clearing or the area is clear to be rubbed, that then it has to be at least reseeded and or mulch so that there's no wind or water erosion issue to maintain the area. So in a nutshell, that's about it. Those are the key highlights.
Questions from assembly members?
It's a pretty simple document. I think if you guys will read it. Did you have a question?
I did.
I didn't see your hand.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
Tim, I appreciate in this version that there's actual boundaries laid out in legal jargon. That's helpful. Can you tell me now, it's articulated 100% of the land within the overlay district is owned by the village or incorporated, correct?
Can you repeat that?
Within the boundary of the overlay, is 100% of the land owned by the village or the corporation?
The village currently owns the real estate underneath the facilities that it has at the corner. The corporation actually made that land available to the village because there was a period of time where they didn't own that. So to reach down and hold the dirt and say it's ours, we stepped up for that. The majority of the real estate is owned by the corporation, but the corporation, again, coming from the tribal side, looks at that as a special area. There are individual homes by tribal members that are owned by them. It was a HUD program back in the late 70s, and there's 1 or 2 non-village people who live within the core of the village.
And the Russian Orthodox.
And then the Russian Orthodox Church owns the real estate.
Okay, so
So the answer is not 100% of the land is owned by either Eklutna Inc. or the native village. There are some lots.
and there are
within.
some lots that are not owned by shareholders that are within this overlay district. Okay. Now I'm going to go right to my concern, Curtis, and I do this with the greatest amount of respect. I've been very clear that one of my concerns is utility easements. I'm fine with you guys having veto power and saying, no, you can't put a park trail through our property. I absolutely respect that. I have great concern with the utility easements. I have yet to find an example. Now, I haven't scrutinized the S version yet, so stop me if I'm wrong, but as I looked through it this morning, I see that both the corporation and the native village essentially has to say yes in order for there to be a utility easement. But I'm trying to find outside of a reservation where else a corporation has that type of power over local government.
That really is the guts of what this is coming down to, is that this is an 800 acre piece of land that is within the limits and boundaries of the city, that has been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and most of the utilities have shown that they can go around this area as well. And we believe that the big question is, there is no future if the utilities, through whatever measure of eminent domain, can come in and put multiple corridors, one corridor, or anything else that totally disrupts the cultural viability of the village. And that's why it's very clear, and Curtis indicated, that Eklutna's never been, and they have a standing track record of being very cooperative to the needs of the community. But there is a very key need that we might as well write off the village if this protection isn't there.
I think that's kind of, I don't know that I agree with that statement. And I say it because I agree. I want to see this to be a protected area, but I'm very, very cautious of setting a precedent that can have other ramifications that maybe we don't even foresee right now. And so I'm cautiously approaching this one, and I'm trying to do it with the most respect and the most candor that I can, because I think collaboratively we work better, and there is no better neighbor, there is no better entity to look up to than Eklutna. They've been a fantastic example for what the rest of the community should strive to be. And so that's why I bring it up, but I'm not going to hide the fact that that's a concern of mine.
I guess a similar instance, and I can give you a little bit of a sample. BLM holds an underlying rider on Bicentennial Park and some of those lands. And so that's a similar situation where if it's not used for park and recreation use, BLM can say no, even though it's within the city's boundaries. It would be a similar thing here.
BLM can say no, but BLM is the government.
It is the federal government.
It is the federal government.
But it does
and
have a control.
that's where there is a difference.
Amy, can I change?
Yes, please.
There are already right-of-ways right through there. If you actually look at the road, there's already infrastructure in there. With her question about the main transmission line, if they ever did a main gas line or any others, it would go by the highway because it makes practical sense. And if you look at the logistics of a line, there's no reason to swing out in the village.
Right.
And if we need something else farther in the overlay district, we'll let the utilities come in. The main water line comes to the edge of this and darts alongside the river. So for the city to think that they're going to need more, a different water line doesn't make sense.
And I agree with
Mike Curry.
yeah.
What's your title, Mike, actually?
I'm president and chair. But I mean, I've been doing dirt work all my life. I've been doing water and sewer. I understand all this. So in that aspect, there is plenty of right-of-ways that go right through this thing to incorporate the residents, the businesses that are there.
We're sort of drifting into debate here. I really appreciate your point, sir. So let's get back to the technical questions here, get those answered today. Are there other questions? Mr. Steele?
Yeah, the city doing it would, if we give up some rights with the overlay district, that still doesn't protect this property from federal or state, the main aspects.
No, we have a line in there
But-
that says, pretty please, don't do
But
that.
the federal and state governments say, hey, we're going to listen to the local government in terms of what you do and try to.
So in effect, Amy, the other part of the challenge for putting major utility lines through this area, I think when they did their section, or would do their section 106 requirements for cultural impacts, they would find a huge number of cultural artifacts and history there that would be very difficult for them to go through and disrupt. Not saying that they couldn't, but that might be in itself an inherent redirection to say, holy crap, it'd be a lot easier to go
Well,
down
I would
the road.
rather people just go around. I mean,
That's what we
honestly,
would rather have.
but I am very concerned about precedent setting here.
Well, if you want to make sure that you control the issue of setting a precedent, make sure that in your findings that you clearly indicate what the super specific special nature of this is. There is no other native village within the boundaries of the city. There is no other cultural base of thousands of years located anywhere else. And this is, I don't want to say it, but this is kind of their last stand. And 802 acres for the future, I think we should be grasping, and I agree with Bill, 5, 10, 50 years from now, I think this city will look back and go, we have a jewel. Am I glad we protected that? We should have protected more, and I'm glad that we can celebrate that it's still here.
One final follow-up.
Please.
Has anyone reached out to the non-shareholders that own property within this? And how many are there, and what are their responses?
We've had overwhelmingly support. We've been out in the village. We've even met with adjacent property owners, and we don't even have opposition from Wells Fargo.
I talked to him too.
Is Wells Fargo the only non?
They're on that one map we showed. They're just on the outside border of that, and Wells Fargo asked for a meeting with me, and they're very supportive of it.
Sure, but I'm thinking of an individual who owns a home maybe who's in this district. And that's why I asked how many are there and
Number 3.
I believe Mr. Curry's right, about 3.
I met with 2 of them, Amy, just to answer your question. I met with 2 of them and showed them what we were up to.
Can I ask a technical question, if I might? I note that you specifically exclude the railroad right away from the zoning map, or note that it's not included. And so following up on Ms. Benbashi's question about it, you know, if there were some reason to put a utility line through there, that theoretically that right of way could be followed without regard to this.
Yep, it's a 200-foot wide corridor, and go for it.
To expand the answer, the railroad's been in there for the last 3 summers. They have cleared their right-of-way. They have improved their right-of-way. They put a new rail spur in there, which we've supported, we haven't opposed. And so the railroad has actually updated that infrastructure, and it's quite a wide corridor. And I believe that's in anticipation of what they're required to do. Patrick, you would know better than me, the lighting, the secure safety.
CGC?
Yeah.
All right, that's the question I had. Thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, I just, we handed out, I wanted to explain, this is a formal invite to what has become just a wonderful event every other year, which is the powwow. The village, back in the late 80s, to their brilliance, said, you know, there's a lot of mystery about us. Why don't we, every other year, open ourselves up for a weekend and invite the entire community into the area? And they feed you, and there's songs and dances, and we've had a lot of tribes from lower 48. What makes this year extra special is that, and I know from the mayor down to the assembly, we encourage a lot of conventions in Anchorage. Our business community thrives on conventions. For many years through AFN, we have been trying to get the National Congress of American Indians to hold their annual meeting in Anchorage. This is a big deal because last year they listened and they selected Anchorage. NCAI, if you can imagine what AFN is to Anchorage, imagine AFN on steroids on a national basis. That's what NCAI is. They are all coming for the weekend of the 6th through the 8th. The Alaska Railroad has actually donated a couple trains. They're going to haul people out from Anchorage out there, and we are inviting you folks out there. I'll also say that during AFN, we all remember a time where the Native community felt like maybe this community wasn't recognizing some of the things that they brought. They moved up to Fairbanks. This city stepped up and they fought to bring them back, and it's been very successful, and this city has been a great host. But at the beginning of AFN, the Dena'ina are asked to come up in a traditional way and welcome all the Native community in. And we're honored because we have Debbie Fullenwider. Debbie is kind of our elder statesman. The last few years, Debbie has gone up representing the Dena'ina people and welcomed them. You will see that kind of event, welcoming, happening out at AFN. And then the book you've got are hot off the presses. Wonderful exhibit that came to Anchorage last fall and through the winter. That is a book. If you missed that exhibit, that book captured that exhibit. And in the airport, you will actually see a piece of that exhibit has recently been moved in the airport, I think as recent as a week or 2. And it's a stump turned upside down with a warrior on top of that stump. And what I learned by going to that exhibit was on low tide, that was the way that they would take, and they used those as platforms. Really neat stuff, so I please encourage you to read the book.
How many tribes are going to be there?
There are 566 federally recognized tribes coming into Anchorage for that week.
Ms. Jackson, do you have a question before we wrap up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I just want to make a comment. And first, I want to say that I really, really appreciate this work session because I learned a lot. I respect and appreciate Mr. Boston and everybody's questions, but I have high regard for Alaska's First People. And this is just really, I'm just thankful for the work session. And I was sitting here telling Mr. Training, well, I have to go visit the village, but I will be there. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Seeing no one else, we're done.